Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Mandi Ellefson, who went from 175K debt to multi-millionaire status by helping to build up and revolutionize consulting agencies. So through Hands-Off CEO, she rescues agency owners from the daily grind, transforming million-dollar agencies into self-sustaining enterprises. With her expertise, she's boosted hundreds of agencies to millions in revenue, attracting premium clients willing to pay much bigger fees. And as a former business exit advisor, she crafts exit strategies, adding up to 5 figures to clients' net profit monthly so they can focus on growth. She shares her wisdom as a published author and host of the Hands-Off CEO podcast, helping consulting agencies triple fees and scale with less reliance on the CEO, which is definitely something I think everybody listening is going to want to learn a lot more about. Mandi, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan.
I guess before we get into your journey, and I really want to understand your backstory a little bit more, can you talk about what is your definition of a hands-off CEO? What does that look like to you?
Well, a hands-off CEO is, there's first of all, there's different levels of being a hands-off CEO. But being a hands-off CEO ultimately is being able to have the freedom to choose to focus wherever you want within your company, the ultimate freedom to be able to have the ability to grow to whatever level you want and to be able to leave for weeks or even months at a time in your business if that's your goal.
And with that in mind, how did you get here? What did it take for you to build a consultancy kind of focused on helping to solve this problem?
Well, how I got here is by having a very hands-on agency. And I share this in more depth in my book, but I share the story about what happened that led me from my branding, web design, marketing agency to what is now the hands-off CEO. There was a gap in between what happened there. So I was pregnant with my second daughter. I was about 9 months pregnant. I was getting up there. And I had a 4-year-old daughter. I had moved across the country to be with my husband and his very demanding medical training program. So really at a time where we could have used the income. If I'm painting the picture pretty well, high stress situation by myself there, pretty hard place to be. But at the same time, I needed to take some time off for maternity leave because I was about to have a baby, right? And I had a 4-year-old daughter, and I was alone doing all of this. It was really pretty challenging. So anyway, my business, I was very hands-on in my business, trying to get all these projects finished out for clients. And my team was just kind of dropping off. They were flaky. I couldn't count on them. And really, ultimately, I'm like days, weeks before this baby's about to be born, and everything's just kind of crashing down as far as my health goes. And it was so stressful. And here I am. I had this business that I really wanted to have run without me, give me this freedom and this income when my family really needed this income, right? And I couldn't. And so I basically just shut down the business and I just took some time to decide what to do about it. And why this was so frustrating for me though, Dan, is that I actually had successfully gotten to a point as a manager in another company where the whole company could grow without me. I mean, the whole thing was run without me. It was like everything was dialed in, and in an industry, it was a real estate industry. It was impossible to do that. Real estate, it was, and in a very down market. So I figured out how to do this in another company, but I couldn't figure out how to do it in my own company. It was in a different industry. So I was really frustrated by this.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I guess to dig into that a little bit, can you talk about the early steps of that process? And I have other questions about the detachment factor. And sometimes if you're more detached, it's easier to solve these problems. But let me start there. What did you do next?
What did I do next? Well, first of all, I dealt with the physical challenges I was running into. I was in so much stress that my arms, I had all these injuries on my arms for overuse. It was so my health was breaking down just as I was about to give birth to my second daughter. So I had to just deal with that. My mother-in-law was sitting there taking care of me, and I was so burnt out. It wasn't pretty, right? But after I had a little bit of time, I had a lot of time to think about this during maternity leave, and I did the right thing. And I said, you know what, it's not worth it. And I shut the whole thing down for a while and decided what I wanted to do next. So I took some space there, and you know what? And that's where, when you opened up with the amount of debt, that's where the debt came from. Debt came from me choosing to prioritize my family over making more income. And that was the right thing to do. And I'm glad I did it. But there was a point where I was ready to come back. But I did all this testing and research. And I was trying to understand what was I missing? What was working in the last company that didn't work here? I didn't quite understand it. And I knew if I could solve the problem for some other people, then I'd be able to solve the problem for myself. So I just started going out, and actually it was a community that you and I were both a member of like about a decade ago. And I was in this going through and doing like some sessions to be able to help and understand what was really going on. And in doing this, what I discovered was that in a service-based company, I found some real root cause issues that what was going on, and I started helping people. And then before I knew it, I started a consulting company. And with this consulting company, my last company, it was a small company, but it was still I still was able to do something with it, and I sold it to an employee at the time, who she still owns it and runs it now. I ended up following this pathway of having a consulting company that I started accidentally. I mean, we could unpack kind of the things that I've learned over the past 12 years, if that would be helpful too.
Yeah, that would be really good. And it's funny because we've had sort of like parallel tracks, kind of a ships in the night dynamic at the group we were in. And I know for us, it definitely went through lots of changes as well. Like the process of I've almost what's the Dostoevsky line? Like you go back to the same place again to know it for the first time or something to that effect. Like I feel like I see that a lot. And for me, it was like starting in an agency, kind of going through the ringer there, going on to a different agency, then finally coming back to focusing on that as a vertical. And then every day is like it's such a changing environment, and it almost feels like a way to niche without niching because it's just moving so fast and it can mean so many different things. But yeah, I'd love to hear. I know that you've talked about your journey a lot already, but what did the next juncture look like? So you're starting this consulting agency, and what happened from there?
Well, and what happened there, I essentially just built up this company to where it is now. But maybe it would be most beneficial is just kind of talk about what we have found is like looking back, what was actually the root cause. I've now since, had consulted with thousands of agencies and worked directly with hundreds of them. So I have, from having that experience, from starting to build out the processes, is fixing these different challenges with our clients. And then we now have seen with it, we have enough data to know like this is exactly what the issue is. This is exactly how to solve it. And this is how to do it within the circumstance. So that might be the most valuable if that feels aligned.
Yeah, that sounds great. And then there's a few sidebars that are already bubbling in my head that I want to jump off to, but let's go there first.
Sure thing. So one of the things that I found was that the reason what was different about the company that I was in before versus the one that I owned was that it was a service-based company. And that the company that I was managing it was a tangible product that basically we were selling. It was very tangible and it was a commodity level. And it was a very simple type of business to be able to remove myself from. I also found that there were some things that I did within that company that basically stacked the odds against me. So I eliminated a lot of problems. Like for example, it was a leasing company, or we leased apartments. And that was one of the things that I did before I had an agency. And it was like I did it for like 6 years. It's how I got through college. And I saved so much money. My husband and I saved so much money doing this. And it was what taught me a lot of the things. But I found that I was able to eliminate a lot of problems by just having a better offer, positioning it better, having better marketing, and getting in front of the right people at the right time where no one else was getting in front of them. And by doing that, we were able to charge higher than everyone else in the market. And our churn rate was extremely low. We had people stay for years longer than our competition. And we just had a really well-oiled machine because I had eliminated the biggest problems. It wasn't because everything was perfect in the business, because it was not. But I just focused on like, not even the 20%. I focused on like the 5% that like, if we just get these things right. And what happened is I was able to rent apartments sight unseen from across the country because we had gotten the right clients that were willing to pay that amount and having the peace of mind, having it all figured out. So we would not have to need to go into the niche, the complexity behind that. But the whole point is I found out that you don't have to have things perfect. If you just identify what the real root issue is, if we can address that, we can eliminate a lot of other problems. We eliminated 80% of other problems, and I was able to leave whenever I wanted to. And like 4 weeks long, it made so much extra money for the owners there that he just basically let me do whatever I wanted as the manager there. So I looked at that and say, well, how do we apply some of these principles into businesses, right? So one of the things that I found with the service-based company is not scalable. It's very difficult to scale. So what is going to make the biggest difference is like, well, you need to have an offer that's so compelling that clients will pay a lot more. And that was one of the things that I had missing in my company as an agency owner. I saw it, I had a vision for it, but I just simply did not know how to be able to create these massive big outcomes for clients that I wanted to. And that I knew if I did that, then we could charge a lot more. And I just didn't know how to connect those dots. So that was one of the big ahas that I found. So that's now something that we help our clients with, is we help them be able to position their services in such a way where their clients are easily willing to invest 300% or more, seeing up to 1,000% more. Price point, longer term investments, bigger retainers, because they have a higher certainty and a bigger outcome. And that, by the way, is one of the biggest opportunities in the market for agencies right now. The good news is most agencies will listen to this and say, oh, I can't promise anything to our clients. We can't do that. And that would make us look unprofessional. And how do you be able to operationalize that? All we can offer is deliverables. And that's awesome that 80% of the market, or maybe even 90% of the market, say that. Because then those few people who actually have great results and who are willing to actually stand by those type of results, they're going to be able to take the lion's share of work, especially now as clients are demanding more.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And let's dig into that a little bit. So, is it possible to get an example of how you see that limiting belief play out? Like sometimes in my writing, I use the Goofus and Gallant thing where it's like the Goofus agency does this, the Gallant does this other thing better. How are the agencies getting this right, rethinking it? And where do you think what's stopping agencies from doing this sooner?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what's stopping them first. So what's stopping them is that everything's so custom, right? Everything's so custom. Well, what kind of results can we get? See, here's the thing: is that prospects when they're coming to evaluate a service, they're asking, and as a sales guy, this is totally your wheelhouse. What am I going to get? If we're working together for a year period of time, what is my business going to look like a year from now? What am I actually going to get from this? And what is the likelihood that we're going to get this result? So how risky is it? So what are we going to get? And what's the risk? And if you see my hands, I'm kind of here's the value here. What is the real outcome we're going to get? And then what is the risk that we're going to get the results? So what most agencies do is they reward, and this is not a bad thing, because they're looking at this from the perspective, I want to have integrity. I don't want to overpromise anything, right? We're not talking about those outlier companies that are promising the moon. Maybe they're not even outlier. They're really growing. So if you see my hands here again, man, there's little outcome, and then the risk of getting at that, it's really high. So you put this teeny tiny gap here where you can sell. What you really want to do is look at how do you be able to increase the value considerably, and then decrease the risk. So that when you do that, then the clients are willing to pay way more. And how you do that is you move into becoming a growth partner. So here's the thing: is it's a lot of agencies say, well, we're a growth partner. They say that we're a growth partner. But what I would look at is how I would know if a company really is a growth partner is by looking at their case studies. So look on their website and say, what kind of case studies, what kind of results have they gotten for businesses they're working with? And by the way, there are plenty of really good agencies out there that just don't have good case studies on their website. I mean, you probably have 10 times the amount of case studies for your clients that are actually listed on your website too. It's just kind of one of those things that happens, especially as you get pretty busy, right? And we're no different. We have a lot more that we haven't been able to publish. But the thing behind this is that your case studies and your results prove whether or not you're really a growth partner or not. So really is looking at how do we be able to actually drive and operationalize real tangible results for our clients? What would it actually take for us to look at our best results for clients? Really quantify them. There's a lot of agencies have not quantified the results. You've asked me to tell a story. I'll get into a story in a second, but I just wanted to share some of this concepts here first. But a lot of them have not really conceptualized, they haven't actually driven what actual kind of results that they're going to get. I'm going to give an example of someone. I'm going to give him a false name on this because I want to be able to go a little bit more detailed into it than would be appropriate for me to share publicly. I'm going to call him Terry. And so Terry, his agency, they were at a 7-figure agency, had a team, probably about a dozen people on this team. And what they found is that 30% of their clients were not actually profitable. And that was something they'd recently looked at. We see this all the time with agencies that they're not aware of that. But in this case, Terry and his team were aware of this. So what we looked at is like, well, how do we be able to get that profitability up? How do we be able to work with that? So what we looked at is we went through Terry's results, the kind of results they had in the past, and it was kind of all over the place, actually. They had some that they had added, they literally had added over $20 million to their company, but they weren't even quite aware of the full impact. We broke it down. We looked at what is really the full impact here. And then there were some that got almost nothing, some like $500,000, like not, so there's just like, and everything in between. So what was going on for Terry is that when he had some sales team to kind of support him with this too, but when they went out to a prospect, they were kind of averaging the results in their mind. So what kind of results? Well, it kind of depends, like it depends. So what was happening is that they were positioning as like the very tactical level of the marketing service that they have. It was a very tactical level. So when we actually broke it down and say, well, you know what, like we looked at what are the most ideal circumstances that you could do your services under, Terry, like your team. What's the most ideal circumstances? And we put together a list of like 10 things. If they did these things, we worked with these type of companies, we could at minimum be able to generate a result of $10 million over 3 years at minimum. And that's on the lower end when we look at some of the results they had created for some other clients. But we looked at, what's going to be right. So what ended up happening then is that they were able to position as a growth partner. We're taking you on this journey. In this case, they were beauty and skincare brands that they were targeting here. And we looked at what is it going to take for you to be able to take these specific type of beauty and skincare brands and take them on a journey where they're going to add $10 million over the next 3 years. And in doing that, and there was a few other categories, but I'm just going to give you one example here. And what they found out is that within their same processes, exactly the same channels, they were already using the same leads. They were able to double the amount of lead flow that they had with what they're already doing. They were able to between double and triple their price point. And they even had prospects starting to make referrals because what they had was just so hot.
I think that's really helpful. And I imagine that like adding 10 check boxes to identify the clients where they could make 10 million over 3 years would entail like a narrowing of their market a little bit. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like what part does specialization play? How often are you encountering the agnostic agency that needs to specialize? Like if you're thinking of what you're doing as this recipe, like when does that ingredient need to enter the picture basically?
Great question. And it also comes up with some questions that, like, if I specialize, and we're not going to get to an 8-figure company with specialize. There's a lot of people who are like, we can't niche down and be able to get to that, right? So what does it look like to specialize? So a lot of companies, when they're looking at it, their agencies are saying, okay, we're going to niche down. So they're like, okay, well, let's give the category SEO. We're going to do SEO. We're going to do inbound marketing for lawyers. Let's just say that. So that's really effective. It's really helpful for lawyers looking specifically for SEO services. That's quite helpful for the ones who already know. But the only problem with that is now they're looking at you compared to every other SEO service out there. And now you're in the commodity zone. So it's helpful because you can specialize and say you're more of an expert and you have more of a process and you can standardize that more. So operationally, that's helpful, but it doesn't help so much. It'll help you increase your prices somewhat, but not like the kind of increases that I'm mentioning, like the 300% plus increase. And by the way, Terry, who I talked about, they increased their price point 2 to 3 times initially, and they went up more after that too, by the way. That was one example of it. But what we find is that with the right kind of specialization, so instead of going into just a niche market and saying we're just going after lawyers, for example, or we're doing SEO for lawyers, we look at it and say, you're going to go after lawyers, for example, say, well, how can we become a growth partner for lawyers? What are the kind of lawyers? And maybe it's not even lawyers. Maybe just take a step back. We look at our whole clients and we look at and say, what is the top 5% of clients that we worked with? What kind of industries have they been in? What are the things that they have in common in those industries? So let's say that they did like weird commercial company where they're manufacturing tree houses. You can't really niche down and just like, we're like the treehouse specialist, that's a little bit too niche down, it's a little too narrow. So looking at what are some of the things that this niche this type of category had in common. And then you could find companies that are more like that and look at where can you can specialize on that and say, what are the things that we need to have in? So looking at those best case studies, they were able to go from 20 million to 40 million a year, for example. So what are the things that they had in common? could be, what do they have to have already in place? So is looking at and profiling what exactly this type of client looks like. And then using that as an opportunity to say, okay, well, if they have these things in common, what would it take for us to be able to create that kind of transformation? Being able to add, an extra $20 million over the next 3 years, 2 years, whatever it is at the timeline. What would it take? So it's looking at the end and saying, what kind of transformations do we want to create for clients?
Yeah. I think that's really good. And what we see a lot with agencies is they'll be like, we work with the healthcare, legal, financial services, and candy. And it's like, well, one of these things is not like the others. Maybe focus on, you have high compliance, you have more conservative, whatever, you have like certain things that go along with it. And then there's always like one that doesn't fit. And it's sometimes it's that simple. Usually it's not that simple though. So I think that's a really good point. I think tied to that is a lot of the times agencies are kind of getting caught up on how to specialize and when to do it and when do I need to blow up the site and reinvent it and that sort of thing. It sort of varies. I'm sure everybody's different, but do you have kind of like a rough order of operation
Yeah,
of this
I
process?
do.
Yeah.
I do. So the companies so if you're at $1 million or even below $1 million, what you want to focus on one category and one vertical. And it's not that you can't do more than that, but it's just you start with one, and because you don't want to boil the ocean. We use a format called Power Ones, and I talk about this in my book, The Hands Off CEO. I released it back in December. But we talk about in the irresistible offer, like how to be able to create an irresistible offer based on 3 foundational pieces. And it's one client type and not one industry, one client type within an industry and one painful problem. So clients can have all sorts of different painful problems, all sorts of different problems. Not all of them are as painful as others. So we want to be solving at minimum $1 million problems or tens of $1 million problems, even better, right? And then one outcome. So if you look at that with that client, with that problem set, what is the kind of outcome that we could create for them under the most ideal circumstances? And those 3 things is what makes up the whole positioning. And what happens is then you can create an irresistible offer around that. You can use that to be able to leverage your fees and it's to be able to get your very best types of clients that are willing to pay the most. Like thinking about it right now, the very best clients that are already in your business right now, how can we generate more of those? And then how can we even take those right there and make them even better? Like if looking at one of the things that we find a lot of times is that the agencies we work with tend to have a lot of clients that are like, if you're looking at the full spectrum of the clients they're working with, probably about 60% of them are not ideal clients. Is that what you've seen too?
If not worse than that. Yeah.
Yeah. That'd be a nice way of putting it, right? So, and here's the thing is like, I get it. What happened is you took on the client in a moment of weakness. You have the referrals come in, you need the cash flow, you need to be able to pay your people. So you take on that work, but before you know it, you're creating yourself a monster. And you have all these clients nipping at you, not paying enough. But at the same time, you're not able to deliver enough results because you have all these people like pecking at you. And in doing that, you're not going to be able to fill your business with the most ideal clients. Because if you actually think about think about your very best top 5 clients in your company. If your business was just chock full of just those people, how much easier would it be to scale? How much more profit would you be bringing in? And how much bigger team would you actually need in order to service that many clients? Here's the things we find is that a lot of times you don't need much bigger team because it's so much easier to service those type of clients.
Yeah. And we went through that exercise recently where it's like we were getting caught up in a million spreadsheets and figures and all this research and all this data and all this stuff. When we just made this thing called the Client Hall of Fame, I'm sure somebody's thought of this. Maybe you've done it before, but I somehow thought of it, probably not independently. And we're just like, okay, well, who's been with us the longest amount of time? And, who are the people that we like to work with? And then we just started studying them like they were like animals in a zoo and getting everything about them on paper. And then, there's a lot of things that are orthogonal to each other. Like we found that the industries, the stuff they sell within the agency world, completely unrelated. But there were things that were similar, like the big lifetime values for the stuff they sold. And I'm trying to remember some others, the size of the agency, headcount, and everything tended to be similar. I think a lot of the headcount thing was like their emotional ability to invest because the headcount's bigger. They've just invested more, and they're used to making investments. So I think there's stuff I think that can be really helpful. let me pause there. Like, any thoughts on that? And then I have another question I can get into.
That's really smart. Like you were saying about the head count, which indicates their level of emotional resilience towards making investments. So you're drawing some connections so you're actually observing behaviors that will indicate whether they're a good client. But then what's great about that is you actually found some physical characteristics that you could point to, that you could actually like have a VA look at and profile and saying, okay, we're looking for these things on the website and on the LinkedIn profile. So you could build a whole hit list off of that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing that doesn't come too hard for us because we're, an outreach focused
Yeah.
organization. But I think seeing that clearly was really helpful. One thing I'd love to dig into is the irresistible offer, right? And I think that I'm not sure the latest incarnation. Different people have different spins on this. Hormozy has a famous one. I was recently at an event, and there was an agency owner that had made this irresistible offer for ads, where essentially the first month was like free, and then it goes into like, I don't know, a cheaper model. And he went from like below 20K MRR to like 100 plus K MRR over the almost overnight, like over the course of a couple weeks. And he hated his life and was basically blowing up the business and reinventing it because of what had happened. Right. So with that, I guess my question is, how do your best clients, how do they build this irresistible offer without building a business that they hate and giving the market the thing that the market wants at the expense of their sanity?
Yeah. So irresistible has to be irresistible both for the founder of the company and for the team, and also irresistible for the client. And charging free is a great way it's not irresistible because it's not sustainable. So looking at and not to mention, I mean, some of the best clients are not going to want to invest in something for free because there's no skin in the game in the other company. I'm looking at that and saying, they're just going to spend all of my time, waste all that. And
Sorry to cut you off, but just let me steel man like a stronger example, a well constructed irresistible offer, but maybe it doesn't necessarily comport with like the long term vision of the owners or whatever. Like, I guess my question is, how are you kind of getting your clients to keep those things in balance, their vision with what the market
keep the things in
is?
balance. Well, here's the thing: is the irresistible offer needs to be something that is going to be exciting for you want to deliver, and for you to be able to do your very best work. One of the downsides to the irresistible offer, or the way that that the $100 million offers, like that has changed the industry in the way people are perceiving how offers are made. It's changing client behavior too, because client behavior, it's changing the old market in that now companies are looking more to they're looking more to results than they ever have been. And I don't think it's just because of that book, but it's because the market is pretty tight. It's really tough right now. And clients are demanding results. They're demanding, they want more ROI for their money. And it's not an unreasonable thing to want. One of the downsides to this, and this is actually why I wrote a book on this good 5 years ago, called Value-Based Pricing. I released to a few people here and there, but I didn't actually bring it out mass market. And the reason why is because of what actually happened with $100 million offers. And I knew this was going to happen, but I didn't want the market to basically go and screw people over. Putting together a really good, compelling offer, you can do a surface level of like, we're going to be able to generate 100 leads for you this month. Like, that's really surface level. It's just like, great. Well, those leads could be crap. I don't know if, like, there's also the different factors here involved, right? But you're setting up someone who maybe doesn't have the ability to deliver on it, a way to screw people over. So you got to be really careful about this, because one side of the irresistible offer is, and the bigger side is actually the part that I actually come from. I've come from the operational focus for how do you be able to make an irresistible offer that you actually can deliver on, that you actually can deliver the promise on, that you can operationalize it. So there's a disconnect. The disconnect is most people are making irresistible offers, or they're afraid to make irresistible offers because they're afraid that they cannot actually deliver on that. And good for them. Good for them for being careful about honoring the integrity, right? And then there's the companies that are just like hot shotting it, hot dogging it, and they're like, all right, we'll figure it out as we go. And I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, but you better be like, I've started my companies that way. I mean, I've said, this is the result we're going to generate for you. 100% happiness guarantee. If you don't like it, we'll give you your money. And that's how I started two different companies. It's not a bad way to do it, but you have to have integrity to follow through on that. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't. So you have to be able to look at getting in alignment with two things. Okay. So most agencies, the way that they measure success is by deliverables. But deliverables do not necessarily mean results. You could deliver a marketing campaign and have the whole funnel set up, have the ads going up, and you could check off the boxes and all these deliverables, but you could actually be hurting the company more by blowing all of their money. And you've like can check off the boxes and your deliverables. You could even show like an uptick in traffic and like pat yourself on the back. And now you have these case studies to put on your website that we helped them increase their traffic 250,000%. But is that actually connected to the KPIs that the company actually needs to generate ROI? And in many cases, in fact, I'm going to say in most cases, they're not connected. And that's why we have such a problem in the agency world with actually delivering real tangible results.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong point. I guess with that, I think a lot of people listening, there's some that are like more savvy. It might be like a slightly younger, more technical agency that's thinking in terms of offers or productized services. And then there's a lot of people listening that might have an older, more traditional agency that have never even thought about posing things as an offer, or maybe they're selling into a much bigger company that's more conservative and they just want a certain function taken care of, and they might be worried about branding or something if they made anything approaching an irresistible offer. Can you talk a little bit about how the latter case is dealing with that? Like how are you, in a more conservative environment, packaging
Sure.
what you do in a better way? Yeah.
Those are my favorite examples. The branding is my favorite example. And, I've got a branding background. So, I understand the nuances of how, on the branding side, like you're selling ether. What are you actually even selling? But I think branding is a great example of this. And I'll give you an example of Mark, one of our clients. He's in the branding space. They actually had a niche already. They were going after in the bank and credit union space. But like branding goes and connects to every single part of the company. So how do you actually be able to be able to put anything around it? Well, that was the challenge they were running into. So they would do these individual packages, like $20,000 to $30,000 packages. Then they'd have to upsell to the next package and to the next package. And so while clients stuck around for a long time, they were happy with their services and they were getting great results for them. But the problem is that to go and upsell each one of those packages, guess who had to upsell those packages? Mark did. The CEO did. So it made him be stuck in the day-to-day of the business. He had to keep hustling for the next sale within the company. So what we looked at is said, okay, well, you know what? With these banks, these small credit unions, they're small banks and small credit unions. What is the most ideal type of client here? What is the very best type of results you could create with them? How could we be able to position this in a different way that will help them be able to package these things together so we can get a really big out, and not just like package everything that they've ever done, but actually look at what is the 20% that's generating 80% of the results. So going through that process, what we did was we went from this was during COVID. The real reason why he was like very willing to make these changes was this kind of scary for him. Like he had already had things that were working, and to go and like make this big change, it's scary for him, right? But what happened is during COVID, they stopped investing in those. Even just the $20,000, $30,000 package, they stopped investing. In order to like pull their head out of the sand, you had to have something different, something better that would help them see this is the pathway. They were looking for the leadership and saying, okay, we're going to be able to take your small bank from here to here. And they had some very specific KPIs that would about double for the organization, really. And so then what happened is they were able to go from $20,000 to $120,000 packages to the same clients who said no. So they said no to the small thing. They said yes to the big thing. And then what that did was it gave him the cash flow of bringing on some of these clients like this. It gave them the consistency of cash flow for him to continue to invest ahead of good quality people. It gave him the profit margin. He actually said that he was surprised that the profits actually increased as they scaled. A lot of agencies, they go down. And ultimately what this did is it allowed Mark to remove himself out of the day-to-day as client results actually improved. And as they increased their prices 600%.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's a kind of a key lesson there that a lot of people that are like newer at forming these packages or offers miss, which is that if you face a barrier, most people's knee-jerk reaction is to reduce price or to assume that price is the issue when it often is not, right? So I think that's really good. And to shift gears a little bit, you talked about how things are tough out there for agencies. Can you talk about that a little bit? Where do you think that pressure is coming from?
So, there's pressure in increased staffing costs. Like staffing costs have gone way up. Inflation has gone way up. So even if you had found yourself, let's say that you had made some price increases over the past 2 or 3 years, you may have found that inflation has just wiped out all the profit margin you made on that. And then now on top of that, you're dealing with the rising costs of labor. And the good thing right now is actually we're in a place where there's so much talent that's available right now. There's really good talent that's available that so if anything, this lights a fire under my butt to like keep growing our company to be able to so that we can acquire some really good staff as we're continuing to grow. We have some really great staff already, but that's one thing that there's a huge opportunity there. One of the challenges is that brands are getting a lot pickier. They're finding ways to be more efficient. The agencies I've talked with too, who, I've had some friends even outside of our clients, or just they're finding that they've had really great clients, really great results, and they just let them go. And there wasn't really even a good reason for it. AI isn't necessarily going to replace everything an agency does at all. However, if it can do it for 1/10 of the price, they might be running the costs. They might be running that saying, you know what, like maybe we'll just go with fits because there are alternates that they can find to make work better. I've seen other agencies where they've had, like he shared for me, we had 4 writers. We eliminated all 4 of these writers in our e-commerce marketing company, and AI was able to do a lot of it. I've heard the same thing with designers. So I'm saying there's opportunities to be more efficient, but it has to be based upon proven processes, which is why documenting your SOPs is so important, because you can actually build out all these tools within your company to be able to help you augment your staff and to be able to get higher quality work done with less people. So anyway, then there's some pros to it, like I'm saying here. There's also some cons to it because you can find if your value proposition is staff augmentation, it's just like taking that heavy load off them, saving them some time. If that's your value proposition, you're going to find out that automation and offshoring and all of these other factors are going to be cutting into your market, and it's just not a very compelling value proposition, right? So really, the opportunities right now to stand out and to be able to get clients to be investing when they're like saying, next quarter, we're going to wait and see. Let's see how the election goes. Let's see how all these things go. You got to find a compelling reason why you can support. They could take advantage of your support right away, and to help them see that it's very low risk.
Yeah, that's great. There's so many places to go there, and we might have to have a whole nother episode on it. I guess one last thought, but one of our last thoughts before we run out of time. That reminds me of the smile graph, which is this concept from Robert Rose. I talk about it in my book as well, which is that there's a value chain. If you're listening to this, imagine a smile, and the top left there's the planning and the strategy and the thought leadership. Then you have this huge dip, which is all the labor and the staff augmentation sometimes, depending on the context, and getting it done. And then back at the other end, it goes back up again to measurement and like things like CRO maybe, and making big decisions with big amounts of data and that sort of thing. Assuming you agree with that, and if you don't, let me know. What are your clients doing to better position themselves in the top parts of that graph?
Yeah. Well, I'm not too familiar with with what you're sharing, so I will look at it within the context of what they're doing right now to be able to, what I would call a value bridge, like move them further across the bridge from the frowny face where things are really stressful to like the happy face. So what they're doing is they're actually looking at and saying, what are the biggest challenges that our clients are facing, and how do we be able to be valuable and indispensable to them? How do we be that indispensable partner? What is it going to take for us to be able to help them if it's doubling their company they want? Is it one of our other clients, Wally, he he's had some really incredible results where they looked at, instead of just doing marketing, they're looking at how do we actually help these manufacturing companies be able to have a more profitable exit. They could add at least $10 million to their exit. And with that, now they're looking at making offers that are and selling. He's actively selling these offers that they're multi-million-dollar engagements over the course of several years, but $500,000 a year engagement, that is at least 10 to 20 times higher than where they were selling at before. And he's been able to go up $25,000 package to $100,000 package to $250,000 package to now $500,000. And his next really is $1 million. So this is from him continuing different iterations of the irresistible offer. And it's by looking at what do our clients need? How can we add the most value to them? How do we keep innovating? And it's just ultimately looking at what the client's KPIs are, putting ourselves in their shoes and having empathy for their situation and saying, how can we deliver the very best? And not from our perspective of deliverables, but from their perspective of like actual KPIs, and not even just that, but like being able to create a bigger vision with them than they could have possibly imagined on their own. And that's really our biggest opportunity as growth partners for our clients is to be able to do what I call vision sell, be able to help them see so far beyond what they could see on their own and then give them a pathway to get there. And if you do that, then you are the only one in your entire market that can help them.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that it's good because it's sort of a constraint you can work with more easily than everything else. So I think that's really helpful, Mandy. With that, to kind of get towards the end of our time, what are you working on now? Like, what are you excited about over the next few months or so?
We're launching our Hands Off CEO book. It's now available for purchase. So I'm really excited about that. And we have been expanding our offerings. We are putting together different offerings for every different investment and for multiple different levels investment. For a long time, we've only been doing really high level consulting. So now we can help more people than we have been able to in the past. But that's something I'm really excited about. And if you listen to this saying, I want to learn more about this, we have a scalability checklist that you can download for free. If you go to handsoffceo.com/checklist, it will list what are the actual steps to exit the company in what order. How do I be able to generate more growth with less of my time? And that scalability checklist is for free there. And there's also a link to purchase a copy of Hands Off CEO book.
Awesome. We'll be sure to get that linked up. And thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, Mandy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dan, for having me. It was sure a pleasure.